The New York wine region ranks third among the US wine-producing states in terms of volume produced, surpassed only by Washington and California. Most top New York wines are made from Riesling, most often in crisp dry style but also as lusciously sweet ice wine. The finest of these come from the vineyards around the Finger Lakes. Other successful varieties include Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and cold climate grapes. New York vineyards, only a step away from Canada, are found along the shores of the Finger Lakes. They have a cold continental climate, unlike any other of the major wine-growing regions of the USA, with the exception of the Long Island Forks vineyards on the outskirts of New York. These are characterized by a mild maritime climate and are home of Bordeaux varieties. With today's guest, Dan Belmont, my New Yorker wine expert, we discuss how wineries in the last 30 years have been experimenting and exploring the region, the cruciality of the lake influences, the styles of this ever-changing wine region, and what other NVA are impressing Dan with their wines. Hi, I'm Mattia Scarpazza, and this is the Looking Into Wine podcast. Wine and winemaking can be complex, but this podcast has a simple mission. We want to give you the skills and tools to harness your passion about wine. Through this series, we will shine a spotlight on some of the different regions, process, and concepts that shape the fascinating world of wine. I hope you enjoy the show and your own journey looking into wine. Welcome everybody. Today with me I got Dan Belmont, wine educator originally from New York, who's going to tell us a bit about the wines of the region and the story about them. Welcome.
Hey, Mattia. Thanks for having me.
I never been to New York, and how does the region present itself? What is the story of it?
Sure. So for me, I think if you zoom out a little bit and you think about the East Coast of the United States, it's a fairly unfavorable climate. When you get too far south, it gets way too humid. You go too far north, the winters are just too cold. And so the East Coast has struggled with winemaking and in particularly, quality Vitis vinifera European grape production since the days of the, Jamestown colony, right? And so, because the South is too humid, the North, very cold winters, really commercial grape growing didn't find itself on the East Coast until the mid-19th century, 1860s, give or take. And that was happening in the Midwest. It was happening in Ohio and Indiana, where they were making primarily sparkling wines using hybrid grapes. So New York State wine wasn't really a thing until the 1900s, and that's now looking post-Prohibition. So New York State pretty much lines up with the Mediterranean in terms of latitude. Generally speaking, it has pockets where the geological kind of formations of the state support quality Vitis vinifera viticulture. In the meantime, we've created a lot of French-American hybrids. There are a significant amount of native grapes that grow in the United States. I think when the Vikings came about in like the year 1000, they called it Vinland because there were so many wild grapevines when they discovered the area. It's not out of the question to think that the East Coast should be able to support good viticulture. It just took a long time for us to figure out the best spots. And really, they're all in New York State, in my opinion. There are grapes growing in almost every state, and wine is produced. There are wineries in all 50 states across the United States. But for me, especially when we're talking kind of terroir-driven wines, it's New York State on the East Coast. Your main kind of producing regions is going to be the Finger Lakes in upstate Western New York, and then the eastern end of Long Island.
As you explain it, is a marginal region, and it really needs to find the right pocket, especially up in the northern part of the New York State. And there is where you find most of the production, and you got your Finger Lakes there. What makes them special?
Right. So, New York State has a very long history of grape growing, again, native grapes, French-American hybrids, table grapes, things like that. And the majority of them are grown on the kind of the shores of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario and the Great Lakes. And the Finger Lakes just sit less than 50 kilometers south of the shores of Lake Ontario. Okay, and so the Finger Lakes are 11 long, skinny lakes that were created by glacial activity, many millions of years ago. And there are 11 lakes. And basically, these lakes, as we know, bodies of water will regulate temperature and moderate temperature in the surrounding areas. We've got 11, which is great. And so the majority is focused in the areas between the three kind of central lakes and surrounding the largest lake, which is Seneca Lake. Seneca Lake is about 61 kilometers long, quite big, and 3 kilometers at its widest. Okay. Cool thing about this lake is it never freezes over. It is, I didn't do the conversion beforehand. It's over 600 feet deep. So that's over 200 meters deep. The United States Navy would do sonar testing in the lake because it had the depth for them to do some experiments and things. And it's a gorgeous, gorgeous lake. And so, people forget that once you go outside of New York City proper, it's a fairly rural state. It doesn't take too long in any direction outside of New York City for you to find yourself in farmland. And so, the region was largely agricultural. And around the 1960s, we had some folks emigrate from Europe, particularly a Ukrainian gentleman named Dr. Konstantin Frank and a German guy named Hermann J. Wiemer followed shortly after. And these were some of the pioneers in the region that recognized this area as viable for growing Vitis vinifera viticulture, right? Before that, again, still hybrid grapes, table grapes, large mass companies making sparkling wines. But, in terms of quality winemaking that we talk about today and what this region has to boast, that really didn't come along until almost just about 50 years ago. So, it's a wine region, it's a wine state, that is in its adolescence. And so the kind of potential for quality to continue to grow and for the region to grow in prestige is unmeasurable. It's really exciting. And so in 1976, there was the New York State Farm Act, and that significantly lowered the threshold for opening a winery or distillery in New York State, the financial threshold. So
the thing about the regions are all the vineyards are situated so close to the lake because the lake has such a big influence. Especially Seneca. That's why it's so important, because it allowed grape not to ever freeze in the winter.
It certainly helps. I mean, it is a region of many, many, many little mesoclimates that dot around the lake. I mean, there's over 120 kilometers of shoreline on Seneca Lake alone. And so not only are the soils varying, but the climate is varying too. And so some areas you can maybe get a kilometer or two off the lake and still be able to support Vitis vinifera through the winter, and other areas you can't. But Seneca Lake, it's so deep it never freezes over, which is really nuts for a lake, a body of water that's that far north. If you go on the New York State Wine and Grape Foundation website, they have I'm sure you can find it. It's an satellite image of the region in winter during a big storm, and the entire area is blanketed in white except for Seneca Lake, and because it hasn't frozen over. And so it's just this beautiful kind of dark sliver in an otherwise, completely snow-covered winter wonderland. And it really is a great example of how much of an effect, that lake has, and the band around it that's going to support. In terms of degree growing days, it's a fairly warm area. It gets hot in the summer. We're talking, 32 to 35 degrees. They can get some pretty hot days. But also they had snow and hail on May 10th of this year.
Wow.
So it's a tricky place, but the cool thing is it's a very specific, and if it wasn't for those lakes, it wouldn't work. It doesn't work in any of the surrounding areas, kind of in the rest of the state, really. And I think that makes it special. It took some time for us to figure it out, but now that we have, we've gotten a pretty incredible place to work.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I really like the wines from New York because they are have this sense of place and which make them very special. And there's a young, vibrant region. And the part in the north, around the Seneca Lake and the Finger Lakes, they are specialized in early ripening grapes because the climate has a very short ripening season. What sort of grape do you think they're working best? Because now there is a mixed bag.
Yeah, and there's a mixed bag. I was a judge for the New York State Wine Competition, the New York State Wine Classic, last August. I was invited to return. We'll hopefully get to do it in February of next year. But we tasted 171 wines submitted across the state, and the number of different grape varietals was staggering. In the Finger Lakes, your top grape varietal is Riesling. Riesling is king up there. It makes a hell of a lot of sense. It is a grape varietal that does incredibly well in cool climates. And so that has definitely emerged as the top white grape varietal. On the red side, I believe it to be Cabernet Franc. I think Cabernet Franc does incredibly well up in that region. And then Pinot Noir, Merlot probably coming in second, third place behind that. But you'll also see a lot of Austrian varietals. I think Gruner Veltliner is going to be something that we see more of up there. Already Lemberger, Blaufränkisch. And then there's a lot of folks that are still working with native or hybrid grape varietals as well.
And the local university has developed a couple of free grape varieties specific for the area.
Yeah, so you have the Cornell University, an Ivy League school up there that's at the base of Cayuga Lake, which is just to the east of Seneca Lake. So you have Cayuga on the east, and they have Keuka on the west, and it's easy to get them mixed up. But yes, you had the enology school there. Experiment within cool climate regions, all kinds of viticulture, and with that also making different grape varietals, new grape varietals.
Yeah, they developed the Chardonnay, Traminette, and Cayuga.
Yep, Cayuga. Yeah, I think Traminette, that's expressing itself very much like a Vitis vinifera grape would. I think the other ones will still show some of their native background. And especially your first generation hybrids like Céval Blanc, Vidal.
And for style of wine, so you can find a very mixture of style, especially with Riesling that you mentioned it earlier. You can find it from bone dry to lusciously sweet. What style do you think is doing well, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, and I think from a marketability standpoint, we're going to be shouting about our dry Rieslings, right? Sweet wine in general is just a little less popular. However, sweet wine has a very kind of warm place in locals' hearts there. So you will still have quite a bit of off-dry Riesling produced into sweet Rieslings. I mean, Riesling is such a diverse grape due to that wonderful acidity. When you have the right growing conditions to do late harvest, Trocken, Beerenauslese, things like that, you should take advantage of them because they're special. And so I think, Riesling is showing itself very well from dry through sweet in that area for sure. Yeah, some of the kind of Spätlese styles have always been my favorite. I love the kind of combination of just intensity of fruit, with that really intense underpinning of acid. And for me, it's all about balance, and I think Riesling regions, I think good winemakers gravitate towards Riesling regions for that reason, because it's a winemaker's grape, and I think a winemaker that can do balance well, that's talent.
Something definitely to look forward to find and look for. So there is a lot of experimentation also. There's quite a bit of different style produced in there, from like who's amphora wines or. Is a biodynamic something done?
Yeah, it's difficult. It was 100% difficult. I do know that Herman J. Wiemer Vineyard and Winery has just turned one of their original plots, their estate plots, over to biodynamics, and I've been running it that way for I think probably 8 years or so. I think now 6-8 years, something like that, and are in the process of getting their Demeter certification, and that might be a first for the region. There are a lot of different growers up there. I think it is a tricky place, and so it does make things like biodynamics and organics difficult. But for me, I just want people to do things the right way for the environment.
When you start moving towards the ocean, the things start changing, especially on near New York. What's the difference between like the northern part, the lakes part, and New York?
It tends to, I don't like to give labels to things that don't need labels yet, but the Bordeaux varietals tend to take center stage out on Long Island. The island itself, it's about 125 kilometers long, give or take. I think maybe it's only about 80 miles long, something like that. It's from that glacial activity, and so it basically carved out this Long Island. I always thought of it as a big sand dune. It's basically, soil-wise, you're talking silt and loam. Really kind of well-draining soil, a lot of sand, and so it's works quite well for Vitis vinifera and for those Bordeaux varietals. So you do see a lot of Sauvignon Blanc. I think Merlot does exceptionally well. There's a lot of Cabernet. For them, it's also kind of a short season once kind of autumn hits, especially when you start getting to hurricane season, things like that. It's not the longest growing season for sure, but you could definitely get some full flavored red wines out of there.
It's more a maritime climate compared to the continental climate you get in.
Absolutely. And so the island literally forks at the end. And so that South Fork has a lot more ocean influence than the North Fork. And there's a lot less wine growing on the South Fork than there is the North Fork. South Fork's going to be prone to more humidity and more fog. The North Fork gets protection from the Peconic Bay that splits in between the two halves of the fork. And then the Great South Bay to the north, off of kind of between mainland Connecticut and Long Island.
So what sort of problems do you find in the regions?
Yeah, listen, the temperatures can certainly drop, and they're going to utilize, the very similar tactics in terms of dealing with frost. You don't have anybody that owns helicopters up there, so it's not Napa Valley. There's not a lot of wind machines, but you will see all of the kind of bases of the vines are going to be hilled up in the winter. So you got a special plow that's going to hill it up, and then when you start getting into growing season, you're going to hill it down. And that's going to help protect. Luckily for the area, that does get quite a bit of snow, and snow's okay. Snow insulates from cold frost. But I've also seen, winemakers that light bonfires in the middle, to kind of drive out some of the frost, or use fire pots like you see in Burgundy. It's quite pretty. But I'm sure terrifying for most growers.
When you're talking producers, there are about 400 producers now.
I think the last count was 471.
They're mostly small producers and very different to other part of the US, which makes it a bit more difficult to pinpoint all the wineries and everything, but it makes it more exciting to find new products. And what other region you think that in the area coming up?
Oh, so, the kind of next one in line, I'd say, would be the Hudson River Valley. And that's the area pretty much directly north of New York City, following the Hudson River, kind of north through the state. And there are quite a few wineries there already. Again, Hudson River Valley, providing the moderating effects that the same, similar to the lakes. And so you have quite a bit of kind of rogue producers popping up in there, doing very interesting things. I think I had an Albarino from the Hudson River Valley recently. So you find these little kind of wonderful gems kicking about. And, I think, folks struggle to put labels on the state and the wines of the state region for that reason, compared to, areas in California that have very distinct identities. But for me, I'd kind of rather let everyone continue to experiment and play around. I think it's gonna create a lot more fun wines that way. And as a very young region, maybe 50 some odd years old, I think it's got time.
Yeah, it's got time to develop and find himself what he wants to produce and what he can do best. And I think that makes the region very exciting. He has quite a big market nearby, which is New York. Definitely is going to help in the future with identify the wine and selling them throughout the world.
Yeah, it's a big target area. I mean, it is very similar to London in the sense that a lot of great wine comes into New York City. And so there is a lot of competition there. And I think even though they are the home team, I think they fight in that big market the same way that they do in any other market, but with a lot of success, I think. And there are wines by the glass and by the bottle in Michelin stars dotting all over the city. I think, yeah, I know. And it depends on how much do I actually want to see during my lifetime. But I think that the identity will continue to solidify, particularly for the Finger Lakes, to continue to solidify around dry Riesling. I mean, it's pretty cool. You got to Google the Watkins Glen State Park and look at some of the images. And it's basically a gorge that was carved out by water coming down from the mountains into the lake system. And you can see just incredible layers of shale. Right, and you realize that this shale, this young slate, essentially, is just all over the region, and that minerality shines through with the wines beautifully, And then you find little pockets of limestone that make for really unique places, and so I think quality is just going to continue to get better. I think as winemaking techniques continue to improve, I think you're going to see people continue to push the envelope there. I mean, one of my favorite wines up there is actually a Syrah. Who'd have thunk that a Syrah could ever grow up a stone's throw from Canada. But man, it is a fresh and beautiful wine from my buddy Chris Bates at Element Winery. We put that next to, we blinded that next to some Gemay, and it's in the ballpark. I don't remember which one we liked better. It doesn't matter. But it didn't feel out of place, and I think that's what's important.
What do you think is going to be the future like of the region?
Yeah, you're seeing producers, figure out styles and characteristics of the different vineyard sites, and they're propping them up and making single vineyard wines, and so that's really interesting too. There's not a lot of older Finger Lakes wine kicking about. It's kind of hard to find just because everybody was kind of in their youth and not really thinking. 30, 40 years down the line, but I've had some Rieslings dating back to the 1980s, and they're doing just as well as anything you're going to drink out of Germany. Not all of them, but the good ones.
Fantastic. And I expect the winery they produce a lot of small different cuvées from different soils, the shale soil, the limestones, and that makes the region even more vibrant, and it's very, very, very interesting region, and I think it's definitely important to follow it up.
I think people will be most successful, I think, if you focus on again, that specificity of place, the uniqueness of that place. I mean, you have basically the entire eastern half of a continent, and there's these little tiny pockets in the Finger Lakes and the eastern end of Long Island that could actually support premium winemaking, and that's really exciting. So I think if you focus on that and the talent that is there, I think that's the best messaging that New York State can move forward with. The specificity of these places attract talent, and there are winemakers coming from all over the world to work there and put roots down there, pun intended. And so it's just going to be the most fun to watch, as it continues to develop.
As a region, the New York State is very young, and there is so much bright future for it, and I really appreciate your time for today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. If anybody wants to check in or ask any questions, you can get me on Instagram, dbcheesynyc.
You joined the conversation with Dan Belmont on Looking Into Wine. If you enjoy learning about the wines of New York, be sure to head to the Boldy New York Wine website, the regional website, which offers an incredible amount of details on the region's wine. Be sure to go to mattiascarpazza.com and remember to join our mailing list now to receive the latest news and projects that are coming up. If you like the podcast, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friend to subscribe. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and every major listening app, as well as at mattiascarpazza.com, where you can listen to the podcast freely and earlier. A special thanks to today's guest, Dan Belmont. Music produced by Samuele Di Nardo, audio edited and mastered by Tommaso Ascoli.